Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, July the 28th, 2023. Today I want to talk about the horoscope of Sinéad O'Connor, the Irish singer who has just died. Now, I was at first quite excited because I found a chart, a horoscope data for her, which had her time of birth, 7:37 a.m. And, I was getting ready to look at her chart from the perspective of a precise time. And then I looked at her Rodden rating and I found it was only a C. So what is a Rodden rating? Well, there was an astrologer by the name of Lois Rodden, and she collected loads of charts, famous people and so forth, and she gave them all a rating on how reliable the data is. And the best rating was an AA, which means the rating comes from a birth certificate. A lot of countries do have the time of birth on the certificate. I don't believe in England they do have a time of birth on a certificate unless it's a twin. I think that's right. And maybe they've changed it since I was last looking at the matter. So AA is really good. So A is pretty good. I think it's A is from memory. Then you've got a B, which is from a biography. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got X, which means there's no birth data available. And then might have a day of birth, but no time of birth. Then you've got DD, which is dodgy data. People come up with data from all sorts of places. I think that Ronald Reagan, Hillary Clinton, I think they're all dodgy data. We just don't have accurate data for them. Then there's C, and C is just unreliable. We don't know the source. And so although this 7:37 a.m. time is widely used for Sinead O'Connor, it is category C, so it's not reliable. This means I'm going to have to look at her chart really firstly from the perspective of it being a noon chart, because we don't know what time she's born, but I'm going to speculate. I am going to use this C rating data to kind of illustrate a technique astrologers use to predict someone's death. And I must emphasize, we don't know for sure when she's born, although 7:37 a.m. it's widely reported on the internet. But I do want to show you some of the techniques that astrologers use to predict death. If she was born at 7:37 a.m., and that is a big if, these techniques would actually have worked extremely well, and one might actually have had a good chance of predicting when she was going to die. But I must emphasize that, well, not only are we dealing with a category C Rodden rating, and for all systems for predicting death, you do need a time of birth, and a pretty accurate time of birth. And secondly, I must emphasize this is not something I do beforehand. I don't go around predicting people's death while they're still alive. It's just really an academic exercise, something theoretical. So that's not the way I'm working. But still, after the event, I don't see anything wrong with trying to predict someone's death. But before I look at Sinead O'Connor's horoscope, I want to look at today's astrology. So today is Friday, July the 28th, 2023. And so there's the chart position of the planets set for noon. You can see that the moon is now in Sagittarius. It's out of Scorpio. And it's making a trine to the sun in Leo. This is really good. Having sun and moon in fire signs, in trine aspect. This trine is healthy. it's life-giving, life-enhancing, and it's really energetic. And after Moon in Scorpio, it's a real breath of fresh air. So if there are things we want to do, if we want to, we've got sort of exciting projects we want to get involved in. Now might be our chance. And in social situations, we can really sparkle. Particularly if we're a fire sign, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. But I think all of us are going to be pretty competent and confident in social situations. And another thing going on is that you see the planet Mercury is 2940 Leo. In fact, today it's moving into Virgo. So the time depends where exactly you are, but Mercury is moving into Virgo, and it's moving into Virgo on the star Regulus. So Mercury is a planet of communication. It works very well in Virgo. It's very analytical. We can communicate with great precision. It's a great day for uncovering facts. It's a great day for sort of just analyzing things that maybe other people don't want to bother with. So if you can get down to it, do some hard analysis, I think you'll find some very interesting things out. And things that are complicated can be unpicked. Now, as Mercury is the communication planet, as it's on Regulus, great time for communicating with important people. It's been on Regulus for a couple of days. I've talked about this recently, but now's a chance to write an email or something. Someone in authority, maybe a politician. If you want to write to a king or a queen, you've got to do it sometime. Now might be your chance. I don't know whether you'll get a response, but so Mercury is in a very good position, and I think that is useful. Now, we can still mess up when we communicate, not least because Saturn is opposition the Mercury-Mars midpoint. The Mercury-Mars is about verbal aggression. Mars is aggression, Mercury is talking. Put Saturn on Mercury-Mars, harsh language. So don't be tempted to use harsh language unless it's really essential. Maybe someone needs to be dressed down. But in most cases, we need to restrain ourselves. Yes, we are quite capable of tearing someone to shreds with our vicious invective, but I reckon that's not such a good idea. So in the verbal department, I think some discipline is required. Now, as far as my forecast for the 12 signs are concerned, here we go. Where have they gone? Here we go. So these are my forecasts for today, which is Friday, July the 28th, 2023. And remember, I've got chapter headings. I've got chapter links. So if you only want to listen to your own star sign, you don't have to listen to this whole block of text that I'm communicating. Just click your own sign and then move on to the next thing, which is my I Ching reading. So here we go. Aries. It's a high energy environment, and you can make things happen. You just have to make use of the surrounding energy, and in this sense, you can be like the conductor of an orchestra. However, don't be too precious about some of your core beliefs. They may not be quite as certain as you had imagined. Taurus, nothing stays the same. And for some Taurians, this is a hard truth. Just as you start getting comfortable, you have to move on. And even the people close to you are changing like the tide. But don't worry. You have your rock on which you're anchored. and the surrounding flux is at worst a bother, at best an opportunity. Gemini, Mercury, your ruler, is changing sign from Leo to Virgo. You become more settled, but also more brilliant, and you have the capacity to analyze and understand everything going on around you. And you'll be on best form when you're on home ground. Elsewhere, the best way to respond to rudeness is to ignore it. Cancer, a good day for looking at numbers. For example, spreadsheets and bank statements. As the digits leap around you, you'll start seeing the underlying picture. But close relationships may not live up to your expectations. Partners may be difficult and they may not be supportive of your aspirations. Consider the situation and act accordingly. Leo, you're becoming more flexible. You can see that the old ways of doing things aren't perfect and that some changes are required. In terms of money, you may be inclined to rearrange things so that you have a better understanding of your income and expenses. A bit of knowledge and transparency can make a big difference. Virgo, Mercury moves into your star sign where it stays until early October. It's good news. You'll be in your element and your communication skills will be mainly excellent. But in the very short term, there's no need to seek attention. You've got things to do which probably don't need anyone else's help. Libra, you're full of ideas and you're darting from place to place. In general, you'll be well received, but with the moon aspecting Saturn, there may be a few hiccups. Your approach may be wrong, or perhaps you haven't paid enough attention to social niceties. But a bit of extra preparation could save you a lot of trouble. Scorpio, the sun and the moon are beautifully configured, and this gives Scorpios an opportunity to be successful and to be rewarded for their efforts. Yet financial gain may require a leap of faith, perhaps raising the issue of money in a way that feels inappropriate. As they say, those that don't ask don't get. Sagittarius, the moon is now in your star sign, so you're going to be more optimistic and you'll see changes to areas of your life which in the past you'd stayed away from. You can see these changes and now you're not so afraid of them. You are actually in a position where you can welcome these changes and then you'll be able to actually benefit from them. But I'm afraid you don't have total freedom. Your family have a lot of control over you and they might prevent you from following through on some of your more ambitious plans. Maybe that's a good thing. Capricorn, I am sure you know a great deal, but you could always know more. And now is a time when Capricorns can expand their knowledge base, reading books, going to libraries, talking to experts. You'll be amazed at how much knowledge you can pick up in such a short period of time. In relationships, you have a certain harshness. Take it or leave it. Aquarius, a favourable aspect between the sun and the moon could be good for relationships. You and your partner will have a natural rapport, and if you're a single Aquarian, a bit of spontaneity can have romantic consequences. But whatever you're doing, avoid the temptation to use harsh words. Pisces, you can't fool people, particularly now when Mercury is moving into Virgo, your opposite sign. So try to be honest and upfront and consider the possibility that you're not the cleverest person in the room. Mercury might symbolize a new person arriving in your life, someone intelligent and probably taller than average. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and what I'm going to do now is move to the I Ching. And so the first hexagram I threw, and remember I'm asking the question, what is Friday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I threw was hexagram 2, the receptive. So you'll notice all the lines are broken. And this is about, being receptive. It's not about being creative. It's not about pushing things out. It's about tuning into the world around us, adapting to the world around us, responding to the world around us. In itself, this hexagram is not good or bad. It depends. It depends how we respond. Now, 2 lines move. The second line and the 5th line moves. And the second line, the advice here is, it's okay not to have plans. It's okay not to have big ideas. We don't need them. We don't need big ideas. We can just let it flow. We mustn't feel guilty. We mustn't feel that we're being lazy. It's okay just to be there with no plans, no ideas about what we're going to do next. And that kind of gives us a certain amount of freedom. So then the 5th line moves, and the 5th line is more proactive, and it's telling us that we can start to make gentle progress, but it's a kind of progress where we're very often going to be dealing with perhaps superiors, maybe at work, or perhaps friends who have who have higher status than us or whatever. But there's nothing we have to do to show off. Indeed, we mustn't show off. We have talents, and this 5th line tells us that these talents will be appreciated, but we don't have to make an effort. Just be judged by your actions. Just quietly go about your work. Particularly in career, be a good employee, and just accept that sooner or later your talents will be appreciated without you having to shout about them. So what you mustn't do is boast. That's not going to work. Remember, this is the receptive. We react. We don't go and push out accounts of how wonderful we are. Just to quietly get on with the job, do your best, and all the while you are being appreciated and being understood. And this hexagram moves. It moves to hexagram number 29, the abysmal. Now, it sounds bad, the abysmal, and it's not actually that bad. It does talk about danger, but it's a kind of danger that we're familiar with, and we just have to flow with it. So by the end of the day, we might be in a situation that is potentially dangerous, particularly if we were to be not used to this danger. But it's not going to be dangerous because we're going to understand it. We have to go with the flow, use our knowledge of this danger to skirt it, and our familiarity with the situation will eventually see us through. And it goes back to the first hexagram I got, number 2, the receptive. It means that we just have to respond. We just have to respond. If we try to be too assertive, if we try to really act on our own volition, then the situation could become dangerous. But if we just go with the flow, it's going to be fine. So what I want to do now is talk about the horoscope of Sinéad O'Connor. So we don't have an accurate and reliable time of birth for her. So in the first instance, I'm going to look at her chart set for noon. So she was born on December the 8th, 1966, at noon in Dublin. Sorry, she wasn't born at noon. We don't know when she's born. I was taking noon as just being a mid time for her. And so she was born in Dublin. So here is her chart. So what are the most important things about it? You will notice that she's got no Earth in her chart. She's only got Uranus and Pluto in Earth signs. And, as you know, I don't count Uranus and Pluto as in terms of elements because, these are generational planets. She's got none of the traditional planets in Earth signs. So she came into the world perhaps not being very grounded and not having a real sort of firm connection to the material world. And I suppose in her case that might have been very useful. If she wants to be a singer, if you're too tied down, I mean, if you want to be a singer who's highly controversial, you need to be able to think outside the box, and perhaps having that lack of grounding may have been pretty useful. And she's a Sagittarian, and I think that really fits. Sagittarius has a reputation for being over the top, for being tactless, saying what they think, and in its own way, being moralistic. Moralistic means having a set of opinions about what is right and what is wrong, and being very clear about them. And looking at Sinéad O'Connor and, looking at, for example, at what she said about the Catholic Church and the child abuse in Ireland, that is really clear. And the fact that she's moralistic is illustrated even further by her Jupiter. So her Jupiter is in Leo. So you can see her Jupiter is in the sign of the Sun, and her Sun is in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So Sun is in a sign ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in a sign ruled by the Sun. So she has a Sun-Jupiter mutual reception. And, Jupiter is a planet connected with not just morality, but with religion. And I think this really shows in her life that, she's moved from being a priest in some offshoot of Catholicism to converting to Islam. So she has not been able to escape religion. So I think the religiousness of this chart, especially with that mutual reception between the Sun and Jupiter, really does show. Now, as far as her angst, I mean, I think that she, through her life, has had serious mental health issues, which I suppose the mental health issues are kind of linked with her creativity. In some ways, if you've got something like bipolar, if you do have certain mental health issues, this can be really a real powerhouse to one's creativity, and we can perhaps see this, with her. She had a Saturn-Uranus opposition when she was born. Saturn was opposition a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. So this was around in the mid-60s. And this was about the 60s. The 60s were a time of great turmoil, of revolt, rebellion, people expressing themselves. And this is what she was born into. And so she was born into this Saturn opposition Uranus-Pluto. Saturn opposition Uranus, aware of authority but resisting it, a struggle, this constant struggle between freedom and restriction. So this rather impersonal Saturn opposition Uranus and Pluto, which a lot of people born in the mid-60s would have had, is made personal by the fact that that Venus is on the T. I mean, Sun weekly. So she has Venus exactly square Saturn. Venus square Uranus. Okay, the Venus Uranus and Venus Saturn may say something about the relationship she's been in. I mean, she's obviously had in her life a lot of relationships. I think she had 4 children. Unfortunately, I think one of her children committed suicide last year. But Venus, classic thing. Venus is a planet of relationships, and it's on hitting Saturn, hitting Uranus. So relationships are certainly not stable, although she had a lot of relationships. So yeah, she may have been a priest, but I don't think she was celibate by any means. Venus is additionally, it's a planet connected with the arts and with music, and so that Venus was empowered by its squares to Saturn and Uranus. That gave her the anger and the structure to be a successful musician, to be a successful singer. And Venus is also in Sagittarius. Sagittarians like to make a lot of noise. They don't shut up. So I think that T square fits really well. And there's other stuff going on. She's got Mercury Neptune in Scorpio. Now, as far as her mental health issues, okay, you could say that the mental health issues, some of them came perhaps from this T square involving Uranus opposition Saturn square Venus. That's a possibility. She does have Mercury conjunct Neptune. Mercury conjunct Neptune, in one sense, can be a little confused. There's a lot of deception there, a lot of delusion, but it may just be more about how important religion was to her. Mercury is in Scorpio. Mercury is not although she made a lot of noise, Mercury itself is in quite a silent sign. This is what's going on behind the scenes. Mercury is in Scorpio. Yeah, Scorpio is a pretty silent sign for Mercury to be in. So when you hear the noise she's making, when you look at what her music and what she's saying, it may come from other sources. Look, she's got Mars. There's her Mars in Libra. It's sextile Jupiter. Mars sextile Jupiter is very assertive, very sometimes aggressive, but it's quite intense, that Mercury, and sensitive. And I suppose to be a musician, you very often have to be sensitive. But because Mercury is trine Saturn, she has the ability to structure it. But it is a shame I don't have a time of birth, and it's so tempting to use that 7:37 a.m. time. But I'm going to hold off just for a bit, and I do want to consider what was going on when she died. I think it's okay to do that because it's after the event. I'm not predicting anything in the future. So with this chart, with no time of birth, really pretty much impossible to say anything useful about when she died, because the techniques that astrologers use to predict death, they tend to require an accurate time of birth, often to the minute. But I can still set up a solar return for this chart for December the 8th, 1966. This is the moment the sun returned to where it was when she was born. So the solar return just prior to her dying would have been in December 2022. So let's have a look at that chart. So remember, this is not entirely accurate because we don't know what her time of birth is. But if you look at this chart, the Sun is about to make an opposition to Mars. The Sun is in really bad shape, moving to that opposition of Mars. In fact, her solar return happened around the time of a full moon, and that's kind of symbolic of a solar return just before a death. I mean, the full moon is, this is the full picture. She was kind of, like you have the new moon as the beginning. The full moon is the final end. It's the outblowing. It's a crisis coming up here. And I think with that full moon tied in with Mars, even without a time of birth, I think one might have got a pretty good idea that this could have been very difficult for her. And if you'd already known that she was we don't know how she died. At least I don't know how she died at the moment. But if you'd known there were problems already, you might have speculated that this might have been the time where her life might have been in danger. And also the moon. Now, we don't know where the moon is exactly because we don't have a time of birth. It could be, it says, could be 15 degrees Gemini, it could be 6 degrees earlier, it could be 6 degrees later, but still the moon is going to be very close to Mars. So, but the Sun and the moon tied up with Mars, I think her solar return indicated that there might have been a problem. Now, as far as predicting death and having an illustration of how one might predict death, I am going to look at her chart set for 7:37 a.m. But I really must emphasize that this data is not reliable, doesn't have a source. I'm just using it for illustrative purposes. So this is her chart set for 7:37 a.m. in Dublin. I would so love that to be her chart because this really, really fits. Maybe, I don't know whether it was rectified. Rectification is a process where astrologers use events to try use events and personality traits to try to work out what time someone was born. But I don't know the details of how this 7:37 a.m. was derived. But you can see with Mars exactly on the midheaven, extremely strong Mars in this chart. That kind of fits. She's a real Mars woman. Mars very strong on the midheaven. Now, as far as the death is concerned, there's a technique in astrology called primary directions. And primary directions are where you rotate the Earth 1 degree, and 1 degree is equal to 1 year. So if you want to know, she was 56, I think, when she died. So you would look at what the planets are doing when you have rotated the Earth 56 degrees. And this is really our planets relative to the horizon. So you would start by saying, well, what is her giver of life? And in traditional astrology, we have this thing called a high leg, and you choose one planet, and it's this one planet. You say, well, this planet is her giver of life. And you say, well, when that planet is afflicted, then someone dies. That's a rather brutal logic of this. So 7:37, she was born at night because it was winter in Dublin. The sun hadn't risen. So if you've got a nighttime chart, you would tend to regard the moon as being the high leg, and that's a simplification. I should also say that when you're dealing with high legs and what is the high leg, there's massive scope for disagreement, arguments. Astrologers may, if you're watching this and you do primary directions, you may completely disagree with what I say. And there's scope for really bitter arguments. And if you look at one astrologer, John Worsdale, who predicted death, who was really into predicting death at the beginning of the 19th century, he would always criticize his colleagues, saying they didn't know how to choose the high leg properly and all this kind of stuff. So I'm aware of that, and if you find what I'm saying wrong, I'm just doing this for illustrative purposes. So because she's born at night, assuming she's born at 7:37 a.m., the moon would be her high leg, so that would be her moon at 26 Libra. And so the theory would be that when another planet comes to the place where the moon is at relative to the horizon, that could be dangerous. So if we look at the sun, she was born before sunrise. And if you rotate the Earth 76 degrees, the sun will rise. It will come to the horizon, it will go up, then it will hit the moon. And when she's around 56 years old, the sun came to the position of the moon. And depends on the technique you use. There's one technique called Ptolemy's technique. It happened last year. Nabod's technique. It happened this year. And John Worsdale talked about something called the terminus vitae. And the terminus vitae is the killing direction. It's the direction that kills you. And when he did his charts, he would always look for the terminus vitae. So assuming Sinéad O'Connor was born at 7:37 a.m., the terminus vitae, in my opinion, would have been the sun moving to the moving to the place of the moon. Now, when I say the place of the moon, I say the place of the moon relative to the horizon. So we have a broad time for when she might die. 2022, 2023, something around there is when it's going to happen. And so what you do now is you would use other techniques to try to home in on that time. Solar returns and something called profections, which I will come on to. So if you look at her solar return, we've already looked at her one solar return, but let's look at the solar return assuming she's born at 7:37 a.m. So if we look at that solar return for 2022, we can see the moon is in trouble in this solar return. You see, the moon is definitely going to a conjunction of Mars. The moon is going to an opposition of the sun. So the poor condition of the moon would indicate that this is the time from December the 26th, December the 7th, 22 onwards. That year may be when she's going to die. Notice also if the Saturn is on the 7th, which isn't great. So the solar return is kind of like the second cog. And then the third cog I would use would be something called profections. Now, a profection is the idea that you move all the planets in a chart, one sign, a whole sign every year. And so that means that in 1 year, so if the sun is at 0 degrees, or in her case, hold on, she's got her sun. So her sun is at around 15 Sagittarius. So in 1 year, the sun will be progressed forward to around 15 Capricorn. And then you can progress it, and it means that every degree of a planet profects is equal to, I think, about 10 days, just over, something like that. And so we could look at her profections. So this means that every 12 years, you're moving the planets every single planet moves at the same pace. moves one sign forward every year. So every 12 years you get a repetition. There's a 12-year cycle of profections. So her profections. So these are her profections for when she died. So let's just see the relationship between the planets is the same, but the signs have moved forward. So let me just put that on a. So if we take so there in her inner wheel that's her chart. The outer wheel is the perfected planets. So what I'm interested in and what I noticed was that she has an exact Venus-Saturn square in her horoscope, and so by perfection you can click this square on, and by the time by July the 26th of 2023, perfected Venus had moved to 1154 Virgo, and perfected Saturn had moved to 1159 Sagittarius. So there's that square, and there's her moon at 26.2 Libra. So what this means is that over the last few weeks, the midpoint of Venus and Saturn had hit her moon. So that this was the final thing. Saturn was 45 degrees from her moon. Venus was 45 degrees from her moon by perfection. Now, the exact aspect would have happened by perfection would have happened maybe a couple of weeks before she died. So I think one would have probably said she probably would have died a couple of weeks before she actually did. But there may have been one final thing that hit her moon that actually coincided with the death. So, but I must emphasize, I don't really have a reliable time of birth. But this is the kind of approach you would use when trying to predict death. You wouldn't just use one technique like primary directions. You would use several techniques, and you'd be looking for confirmation. It would be like like a combination lock. One wheel has to go, has to turn, then a second wheel, third wheel. When it all lines up, that's when you die, according to the theory. But the primary direction, this terminus vitae, directed sun moving to her moon, would be the thing that would kill her, and then you would look at other things to fine-tune the timing. But I must emphasize, we don't have a time of birth, and reality is all we can work on is that noon chart. The noon chart showed that she had a really nasty solar return, regardless of what time she was born. And I think from that solar return, this solar return where we don't have a time of birth, but where we do have a day of birth, this solar return is really nasty, and I think this would have indicated that it was going to be a difficult year. And so if you're practicing astrology, I think this emphasizes that you do have to use solar returns. Solar returns are an essential part of the astrologer's toolkit. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on the subject of Sinéad O'Connor. I'm just really sorry I haven't got an exact time of birth, and I was being speculative. And as I said, I don't like to use charts that... I don't like to speculate on times unless I'm really sure, because otherwise there's plenty of scope for seriously embarrassing yourself. Anyway, that's it for today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.